Welcome back to my channel. This is part 3 of our Back to Basics series. If you have not seen part 1 and part 2 as yet, click those little links to the top of the screen. And if you have, let's get started. In this part, we will be doing acrylic application and shaping. So I'm now applying my second coat of primer right before I apply my acrylic, and I measure my nail from cuticle to free edge before I apply the acrylic, just to make sure that all of my nails are the same length. I pick up my first bead of acrylic, and if you notice, it's not too wet, it's not too dry, it's not running off of my brush. I apply this bead of acrylic on my free edge, and I use the belly of my brush to begin patting and pulling this bead down until it reaches the length I want. I use the side of my brush as I go along to push the sides of the acrylic up, and at this stage I'm beginning to form the shape that I want. By forming the shape that I want and getting it done as perfect as possible in the application process, I have less filing to do. So I use the tip of my brush to blend in the back of that first bead of acrylic so that I don't have a lumpy application, and I use the belly of my brush to pull the bead downward towards the length that I want, and the side of my brush I use to create my shape. I also use the side of my brush to push the top of the acrylic in place so that I get a straight free edge. As soon as the acrylic has started to harden and it has begun losing its shine, I pinch gently the tip of my foam so that my acrylic will form a perfect C curve. So I'll now be going in with my second bead of acrylic. This bead is a little bigger, and I apply this bead right before the first bead, and I'm going to begin building my apex and also thicken up the first layer of acrylic that I put down. So as I apply the acrylic, I begin immediately patting it into place. I always use the tip of my brush to blend in the back of that bead again so that I don't have a lumpy application, and then I begin using the belly of my brush to gently start patting and feathering that bead all the way down to the free edge. As I go along, I use the tip of my brush to always make sure that my side walls are clean and my cuticle area is clean. This is so that I do not end up with acrylic drying on my skin, as you will run into problems with lifting. So I'm now going in with my third and final bead of acrylic for this nail, and I apply that bead right before, maybe like a millimeter before the cuticle area. Try not to let that bead of acrylic touch your cuticle at all. I use the tip of my brush once again to get behind that bead and blend it in so we have a seamless application, and then I use the belly of my brush to begin pulling and feathering that bead out. I go in with the tip of my brush always and clean up the side walls and the cuticle area to ensure that my acrylic is not touching my skin. So with 3 beads of acrylic on this baby finger, I have built myself a beautiful apex. The apex is what gives the nail the strength. So if you do not have a high enough apex, you will find that your customers will complain about lifting, because if they bounce their fingers often, it will put stress on your enhancement and it will cause the back of the acrylic to begin to lift off. So we'll now begin repeating the process for every finger. I apply my second coat of primer just before I apply the acrylic, and here you can see that I am measuring Once again, from cuticle to free edge, I do this before I apply acrylic to every nail to make sure that all of my nails are the same length. So I've picked up my first bead of acrylic. As you can see, the consistency is not runny, it's not dry. I press and release this bead from my brush, and then I begin to immediately go behind, feathering the back of that bead so that my application is not lumpy, and begin using the belly of my brush to press and pull the acrylic downward to form the length, and use the side of my brush once again to begin forming my coffin shape. Once again, once the acrylic has begun to lose its shine and it started to harden, I pinch the tip of my form so that I can create that perfect C curve. So here again, I have picked up my second bead of acrylic. Notice the consistency, it's not runny and it's not too dry. I place that bead of acrylic again down in the middle of the nail, right above the first bead of acrylic. I immediately push my brush behind that bead of acrylic and begin blending in the back and working my way downward, patting that acrylic into my nail and feathering down as I go as quickly as possible so that I have some wiggle room to come back in and perfect my application. I also immediately carve out my sidewalls and my cuticle area with the tip of my brush. This is always to make sure that my acrylic is not touching my skin, my sidewalls, or my cuticle, because this will cause lifting. I always take a few seconds in between application to make sure that my lengths are consistent. So I always measure matching fingers on each hand and the fingers that are next to each other to make sure that they are all the same length. Going in with my third bead of acrylic now, which is the cuticle bead. I place this bead of acrylic a millimeter away from my cuticle and I use the tip of my brush to push it back as well as to get behind that bead of acrylic and begin blending and sealing the back of that bead, and again patting and pulling the acrylic downward, blending it into my apex and down the length of my nail. Again, always using the tip of my brush to carve out around the cuticle area and sidewalls to make sure that the acrylic is not touching my skin. So if you notice, I have a tiny little hole right up in this cuticle area. I'm just going to take a small pearl of acrylic and apply it and blend it out, as well as again carve out the sidewalls and the cuticle area with the tip of my brush. In most cases, I strive for a 3-ball application of acrylic, but in some cases, depending on the size of the beads that I pick up, I end up having to go back in with smaller pearls of acrylic just to fill in little areas. For instance, if you take a look at the side view of my apex for this nail, there's a little sink. So I'm just going to go back in with a small pearl of acrylic. I'm going to rest that pearl down onto the sink, let it flow while I clean off my brush, and then go back in, pat it into the nail and begin to feather it out so that I have a seamless application once again. Okay, so that is the apex we know and love. And it has lost its shine, it has dried. We remove the foams by pinching and pulling downward, and then we just tear the corrugated tops and separate the foam from the nail. Now it's time to file. Now that is secret. I call these the good files. I have learned of these through Sean Legend's class with us in Trinidad here last year, and I vow that I will never use another file again to shape my nails. They are the best, and you will see why in a minute. Shameless plug for nail techs in Trinidad. We will be launching our version to these files, and they will be available Monday coming. So check out our Charmed by Seyu Instagram page to get your hands on those. Okay, so this is a brand new file. I just cut the edge, and at first I'm going to just use the file to remove any excess acrylic below the nail, as you see here. And this is my final check just to make sure they all line up before I file. If they don't, then I will just use my file to adjust the lengths of the ones that are longer. So what I do is I perfect the shape with the hand file. Remember, I told you that I do the shaping with the proper application of acrylic and making sure that it's as close as possible to the shape that I want. At this stage, I just use my hand file to perfect the shape, and that is to give me some straight, clean, crisp lines. So I always chuck the file straight against the acrylic and drag the file down to create the straight lines, and what I do to one side, I do on the other side. That is to make sure that I have some symmetry going on. So notice the direction I am holding my file as I file my free edge. This is because I find that I have more control over the file, and when I hold the file this way while filing the free edge, I end up with that perfect square. I find that when you hold the file in a horizontal direction to file your free edge, you tend to lose a little bit of control on the file and you ended up with rounded edges. And I love perfectly square free edge. I just have a weakness for perfectly shaped acrylics. Now, I'm far from perfect, but I really try to perfect the shape as much as possible for me. Leave me a comment in the comment section below if you share my weakness. Okay, so I'm using a medium grit ceramic bit, and I'm gonna begin going around my cuticle on a medium speed. I mean, you work at whatever speed is, good enough for you. And I just pull my sidewall so that my bit does not touch my skin, alright? And I just go around the cuticle area to seal the acrylic. This is to make sure that we have no lifting and to also have a very flush, clean cuticle for polish application. So once I have gone around the cuticle, I just begin using the tip of my bit to file the base of my acrylic. I use the middle shaft of my bit to file the middle of my nail, and then I use the bottom part of the bit to go over the tip of my nail. And I just repeat this process on all of the nails. After that, I go in with a medium grit sandband just to remove any file lines from the enhancement. And then I just buff the nails in preparation for gel polish application or whatever design I'm gonna do. ever so lightly with my medium grit sanding band. I'm just gonna lightly go over the nail from cuticle to free edge and sidewall to sidewall to get rid of any file marks from my ceramic bit. This is not to debulk the nail in any way or to change the shape of the nail in any way, it's just to get rid of the file marks. And finally, I'm just giving them a quick rough buff with my buffing block. I'm not giving it a smooth buff because I will be applying gel polish after. And you know that when the acrylic is too smooth and it's not as porous, the gel polish tends to peel off. Okay guys, so we've come to the end of our mini series Back to Basics. This is the end result of my application process using foams and how I file my nails. I really hope you've learned something new and I was able to share with you something you didn't already know. Leave me comments in the comment section below, letting me know your feedback, letting me know if you've enjoyed it. I really hope you did because a lot of you have been requesting this series. So from here on out, it's back to design. Let me know what you want to see next and I hope you have a good weekend. Bye!